Welcome to the Deeper Thinking podcast. What if love isn't something we choose, but something that chooses us? What if the partners we fall for, the ones who keep us waiting, who make us chase, who ignite our deepest anxieties, are not accidents, but echoes of something much older? Today, we unravel the unsettling truth about love as a repetition of pain. From Freud's theory of repetition compulsion to Lauren Ballant's cruel optimism, we examine why so many of us are drawn to relationships that mirror our past wounds. Are we chasing love, or are we simply chasing the ghosts of our own history? Desire, as Jacques Lacan suggests, is never about the object itself. It is about the longing. We do not fall for people, we fall for patterns, and yet there is a way to break free. What does it mean to truly unlearn pain as love? To see love not as something earned through suffering, but as something that simply arrives. To explore more about the concepts and thinkers discussed, including Freud's repetition compulsion, Ballant's cruel optimism, and Lacan's theory of desire, please go to the description where you'll find a link to the episode webpage, which includes additional reading, resources, and recommendations. Love is supposed to be a choice. That's what we tell ourselves. That we are drawn to certain people because of taste, preference, personality. That attraction is some ineffable mystery, a spark, an instinct. But what if love, at least the kind we keep falling into, is not a choice at all? A man finds himself entangled again with someone who keeps him at a distance, who draws him in just enough to make him stay, but never enough to make him feel secure. He tells himself it's chemistry, something rare. A woman, brilliant and self-sufficient, keeps loving men who diminish her, who make her feel like she is asking for too much. She believes this time will be different. It never is. The details change, but the rhythm is the same. Attraction as compulsion, love as a loop. Jean-Paul Sartre once wrote that people deceive themselves into believing they are free when they are in fact following scripts written by history, by culture, by wounds they do not even remember receiving. Simone de Beauvoir took it further, arguing that women in particular are conditioned to see love as the defining project of their lives, often at the cost of their own identity. But this is not just philosophy, it is psychology. Freud called it repetition compulsion, the unconscious drive to recreate past emotional wounds, not to heal them, but to finally master them. The problem is, the past does not resolve itself through repetition. The neglected child who seeks out neglect in adulthood does not find closure, only confirmation of what they have always feared. The anxious lover who chases someone emotionally distant does not prove their worth. They only relive the ache of waiting for someone who will never fully arrive. It is easy to call this bad luck, to believe that love is cruel, that it keeps putting the wrong people in our path. But the truth is harder to face. It is not that we keep meeting the wrong people, it is that we keep choosing them, drawn toward the familiarity of pain. Love, when distorted by past wounds, is not a decision, it is a memory playing itself out again and again. We think we are falling in love. More often we are falling into history. Desire is not rational. If it were, we would all choose partners who bring us peace, who make love feel safe, steady, and kind. But desire does not work that way. It is not a logical equation, not a process of weighing pros and cons. It is something older, something written into the nervous system before we had the words to describe it. A child who grows up in chaos does not long for calm. They long for the chaos they recognize. A person who was only valued when they performed, when they pleased, when they excelled, does not know how to accept love freely given. It does not feel natural. It does not feel real. Instead, they seek out the same conditions again, compelled to chase, to prove, to earn. This is not conscious. No one meets someone and thinks, yes, you remind me of my childhood wounds. Let's do this. It is deeper than thought, buried in the way the body responds, in the tension mistaken for attraction, in the way longing feels like home. Nietzsche spoke of amor fati, the love of fate, the idea that we should embrace all that happens to us, making peace with suffering. But love twisted by trauma turns amor fati into something darker, not acceptance of fate, but the compulsion to recreate it. A person who has only known love as uncertainty does not trust love that arrives without resistance. Stability feels foreign, too still, too quiet. And so they seek out lovers who keep them waiting, who pull away just far enough to make them reach. It feels like passion, but it is only fear disguised as love. John Bowlby, the father of attachment theory, argued that our first relationships form the blueprint for all future ones. A securely attached child, one whose caregivers were consistent and responsive, grows up believing that love is safe, that closeness is not a threat. But for those whose early relationships were unstable, love is not a refuge, it is a storm. The anxious lover clings, desperate for reassurance. The avoidant lover withdraws, afraid of being consumed. These patterns are not choices, they are survival instincts, repeated over and over as if by muscle memory. Lauren Berlant's concept of cruel optimism describes another layer of this compulsion. The way people cling to things that harm them, not because they don't see the damage, but because they believe, against all evidence, that these things will eventually bring them happiness. This is the logic of painful love. We do not endure suffering because we enjoy it. We endure it because we have been conditioned to believe that if we suffer long enough, love will finally stay. The irony is cruel. We do not chase love. We chase the conditions we associate with it. A person raised on inconsistency finds consistency dull. A person who has only known conditional love cannot recognize love that does not require struggle. We are drawn not to what heals us, but to what feels familiar. And what feels familiar is often the very thing that once broke us. Love, at its most intoxicating, often feels like a puzzle, something to decode, to earn, to chase. The unpredictable warmth of a distant lover, the rush of hope in an unanswered text, the dizzying high of a reconciliation after days of silence. We mistake this turbulence for passion, believing that the more uncertain love is, the more meaningful it must be. But this is not love. It is survival instinct misfiring, a cycle we cannot seem to break. At the heart of this illusion lies a simple mechanism: intermittent reinforcement. It is the same psychological trick that makes gambling addictive. If a slot machine paid out consistently, it would be predictable, uninteresting. But when it rewards at random, when the payout is just rare enough to keep hope alive, it becomes an obsession. The uncertainty, will I win this time, creates a dopamine surge more powerful than any steady reward ever could. The brain, wired to find patterns, confuses inconsistency with significance. Love follows the same brutal logic. The partner who is warm one moment and cold the next does not inspire devotion despite their inconsistency, but because of it. They create an emotional roller coaster where the highs are magnified by the fear of loss, where every small gesture of affection feels euphoric simply because it is rare. A person conditioned by past wounds does not experience this as suffering. They experience it as proof that love is real. Hegel's master-slave dialectic offers an unsettling insight into this dynamic. In every power struggle, one person depends on the other for recognition. The lover who withholds wields control. The lover who waits is caught in an endless cycle of seeking validation. But the real tragedy is that neither is satisfied. The one who clings is never reassured. The one who withholds is never fulfilled. They orbit each other, mistaking tension for destiny, reenacting old wounds under the illusion of something new. Jacques Lacan argued that desire is not about obtaining what we long for, but about the longing itself. We do not desire people as they are. We desire them as symbols, as unfinished stories, as echoes of our past. This is why the relationships that hurt us most feel impossible to escape. They are not just relationships, they are unresolved narratives. The lover who leaves reminds us of the one who left before. The lover who keeps us guessing replicates the instability that once shaped us. And so we mistake their absence for fate, believing that if we just try harder, if we just prove our worth, the ending will change. But the ending does not change. The love that keeps us waiting is not love at all. It is a cycle, a loop, a ghost story where we are both the haunted and the haunting. And as long as we mistake suffering for meaning, we will keep returning to the same wounds, convinced that if we endure enough, love will finally stay. Love has always been a story we are taught, rather than a feeling we simply experience. From childhood, we are fed narratives that glorify longing, that equate struggle with devotion, that tell us love must be fought for to be real. The greatest romances, the ones that linger in the cultural imagination, are rarely about stability. They are about aching, about lovers kept apart by fate, by circumstance, by their own self-destruction. Heathcliff and Catherine in Wuthering Heights, Gatsby and Daisy in The Great Gatsby, Marianne and Connell in Normal People. These are not stories of fulfillment. They are stories of desire that is never fully satisfied. And we have been conditioned to mistake that lack of resolution for proof of love's depth. It is no surprise, then, that when love arrives without struggle, when affection is given freely rather than rationed out, many find themselves recoiling. A seemingly inexplicable loss of attraction towards someone who should, by all accounts, be a perfect match. Someone kind, emotionally available, eager to know us without hesitation. But instead of feeling drawn in, we feel repelled. We tell ourselves that something is missing. But what is missing is not chemistry, not passion, not some ineffable spark. It is the suffering we have been conditioned to associate with love. Slavoj Žižek, in his critique of ideology, argues that we do not simply desire, we are taught what to desire. The structure of our longing is shaped by the narratives we absorb, the images we consume. And in love, the dominant ideology is clear. The greatest romances are not steady but tragic. The people who make us wait, who keep us guessing, who ignite our deepest insecurities are the ones who feel most real to us. A love that is certain, that does not provoke anxiety, feels suspiciously easy. Without conflict, we assume there must be something lacking. This is why so many people unknowingly sabotage relationships that offer them peace. They say things like, I don't know why, but I lost interest, or they were perfect on paper, but something was off. What is off is not the other person. What is off is the absence of emotional chaos. When love is no longer a battle, when it does not demand endurance, when it does not leave us waiting for a message that may never come, the nervous system does not know how to interpret it. Modern dating culture reinforces this conditioning. The rise of ghosting, breadcrumbing, and situationships has normalized unpredictability, making emotional unavailability the default setting for romance. Stability feels like an anomaly. We have been taught that love should come with a sense of yearning, that the person who keeps us waiting is more valuable than the one who stands before us, willing to meet us fully. But this is not an organic truth of attraction. It is the result of a culture that has glorified suffering in love. Hegel's dialectic tells us that transformation begins with contradiction, with the moment where two opposing forces collide. The ick is such a moment. It is the body rejecting something unfamiliar, something that does not align with its old survival patterns. Instead of seeing it as discomfort to be worked through, we take it as a sign to walk away. We assume that the absence of anxiety means the absence of depth, when in reality, it is only the absence of pain. To break this pattern is to unlearn an entire mythology. It is to understand that love is not meant to be pursued like a prize, that it does not become more meaningful through struggle, that it does not need to be earned through suffering. Love, when it is whole, does not hide itself. It does not keep us waiting, does not ask us to prove our worth. And perhaps the hardest lesson of all is learning how to stay when love no longer asks us to endure. Recognizing the pattern is not enough. The mind does not unlearn its attachments through awareness alone. If it did, no one would find themselves returning the same wounds in different forms. No one would stay in relationships that drain them. No one would mistake longing for love again and again. But the nervous system does not operate on logic. It operates on memory, on the deeply ingrained lessons of past experiences. Breaking the cycle requires more than understanding. It requires rewiring the body's response to love itself. Aristotle argued that character is shaped not by fleeting insight but by habit, by the slow and deliberate practice of new ways of being. Love is no different. The person accustomed to proving their worth in relationships will not suddenly be drawn to stability. The pull toward the familiar will not vanish overnight. What must change is the response to that pull. Instead of surrendering to the magnetic force of what feels like chemistry, one must pause long enough to ask, is this love or is this a memory? The first step is learning to sit in the discomfort of security, to stay when love is not a chase, when affection is not rationed out like a scarce resource, when there is no need to perform for approval. For those accustomed to emotional unpredictability, this kind of love will not feel exhilarating. It will feel foreign. The nervous system, conditioned to equate love with uncertainty, will instinctively seek out what it knows. And so the work begins not in chasing the right person, but in resisting the instinct to flee from them. This is where healing becomes an embodied process rather than just an intellectual one. Somatic therapy, which focuses on retraining the nervous system, suggests that change must be felt before it can be believed. It means recognizing when the body is craving the adrenaline rush of an unstable partner, when the heart races in response to inconsistency, and instead of mistaking that reaction for passion, understanding it as an old wound being triggered. It means grounding oneself in the present, resisting the urge to chase, to prove, to cling. It means choosing stillness over the high of uncertainty, again and again, until the body stops interpreting peace as danger. Modern neuroscience confirms what ancient philosophy long suggested, that what we repeat, we become. Neural pathways strengthen with repetition, meaning that love can be rewired, not in a single moment, but through repeated choices. Mindfulness, attachment-focused therapy, and self-reflection exercises all serve as tools for reshaping how love is experienced. Over time, the old patterns lose their grip. The highs and lows of toxic love become less intoxicating. The craving for chaos fades. Lauren Berlant's Cruel Optimism describes the way people cling to things that harm them, not because they don't recognize the damage, but because they have been conditioned to believe that enduring pain will eventually be rewarded. This is the trap of painful love, the belief that suffering is a necessary prelude to happiness, that if we just wait long enough, prove ourselves enough, we will finally be chosen. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, wrote that the mind must be trained to desire what is good rather than what is merely pleasurable. This is the work of breaking the cycle, not just resisting the pull toward what wounds, but actively cultivating an attraction to what heals. It is the daily, quiet decision to walk away from what is familiar but harmful, and to stay with what is unfamiliar but safe. It is choosing discomfort over destruction. But most of all, it is understanding that love does not have to be earned. It has only ever needed to be accepted. To unlearn pain as love is to reject the most enduring illusion of all, that suffering is proof of depth, that longing is the measure of devotion, that love must be fought for to be real. It is an act of rebellion, one that demands not only personal transformation, but a rejection of the very systems that have conditioned us to equate scarcity with value. Because love is not just a private experience, it is a political act. The way we love, the way we allow ourselves to be loved, is shaped by forces larger than ourselves, by capitalism, by gender norms, by cultural narratives that romanticize suffering. The idea that love must be earned is not an accident, it is a structure. It is a belief that keeps people tethered to relationships that diminish them, that makes them feel disposable in an economy of endless choice, that convinces them to stay where they are not valued because they have been told that leaving means failure. This is especially true for women who have long been taught that their worth is in being chosen, that love is something bestowed upon them rather than something they can claim for themselves. It is true for men who are told that vulnerability makes them weak, that emotional distance is a form of power. And it is true for anyone who has been shaped by a world that glorifies independence to the point of isolation, that frames attachment as a weakness rather than a fundamental human need. Eva Illouz, in Why Love Hurts, argues that modern relationships are not just personal struggles, but reflections of deeper economic and social conditions. Love has been commodified, shaped by the same scarcity mentality that governs the marketplace. People become products, their value determined by their desirability, their ability to withhold, their power to leave first. The rise of dating apps, of ghosting and breadcrumbing, of relationships that exist in a state of perpetual ambiguity, none of this is accidental. It is the logical outcome of a system that has turned love into a game of optimization rather than devotion. Lauren Berlant's Cruel Optimism deepens this analysis, showing how people cling to relationships, ideas, or structures that harm them because they believe against all evidence that these things will eventually provide what they have always wanted. Painful love, love that must be earned through suffering, is one of the strongest examples of cruel optimism. We do not endure it because we enjoy it. We endure it because we have been told that one day, if we are patient enough, if we prove ourselves enough, it will finally become what we need. To break free from this is not just to change how we love, it is to reject an entire structure of belief. It is to stop chasing what withholds, to stop mistaking distance for depth, to stop believing that love must always be a struggle. It is to choose something radical, the possibility that love does not have to hurt, that it can be steady and kind and certain, that it can arrive without games, without suffering, without a test to be passed. But perhaps the greatest challenge is not in finding love like this. It is in recognizing it when it stands before us, in learning how to stay when love is no longer something to earn, in understanding that the absence of suffering is not the absence of love. It is only the absence of everything that love never was. Maybe love was never meant to be chased, or maybe we were just never meant to run so far from it in the first place. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Deeper Thinking podcast, an audio essay read by me, Holly, your digital narrator. For further reading, resources, and recommendations, visit the episode webpage linked in the description. Until next time.